What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Full Disclosure Podcast, and today we got a really special episode, our first interview. And who are we interviewing today? We have brought onto the show Danny Smith. A lot of you may not know Danny Smith, but Danny Smith was actually Jake Paul's head coach for 2 years. And one thing we really want to do on the show is bring on some people who have a lot of insight in the boxing game. Danny's also been a coach for about 20 plus years, and this is someone that hasn't really got a lot of time to speak out publicly about his experience as a coach, training Jake Paul, things that had to do with the Tommy Fury fight, etc., etc. So we thought, what better way to start off these podcast interviews by bringing on someone like Danny.
Yeah, exactly. This is the guy who burst onto the scene the day Jake delivered that brutal KO of Tyron Woodley. The first man Jake Paul ran to in his corner was Danny Smith. They hugged, they embraced. It was a real proud father and son moment. And also, don't forget that Danny Smith was there for when Jake defeated the great Anderson Silva too. So, as I said, real honour to speak to Danny today and looking forward to it.
I agree 100%. So, without further ado, let's get this started.
Hey.
How's it going, man?
Man, everything's going very, very well.
Man, Danny, good to see you, bro.
Yes, sir, man. Life is great.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Full Disclosure Podcast. I'm here with Nathan, as you heard in the intro, and I'm delighted to say that we are here today with a very special guest. We got Danny Smith. So, Danny, welcome to the podcast. We appreciate your time, bro. How's it been going lately?
Man, it has been going wonderful, man. Life has been great. I'm getting back active again. I got a kid out of Houston named Carlos Nava El Gal. He's 10-0 with 6 KOs. I'm fixing to start training him. I'm getting ready to move back to Las Vegas.
Awesome.
And get back into the game.
That's sick, man. Now I think we should go to kind of the start of how you got in the boxing. So, Danny, a question I had was, going back to the start of your life, were you born into like a boxing-oriented family? Like, did you have a father or any uncles that were big into boxing? How did you get into the sport to begin with?
My grandfather, he was a fighter, and he was fighting in the military. And we're also related to Archie Moore. That's his cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And I boxed amateur, started out in Arkansas and then moved to Tennessee. I worked with Big John Tate, former heavyweight champ. And it was just fun. I had amateur boxing and I played football also. So I happened to go to college playing football. And I came back to boxing after graduating. And was working with fighters and being a finance manager at one of the major dealerships in Tennessee.
Oh, nice. See, I was going to ask you about your amateur career. So you did have an amateur career then, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. How many fights did you have roughly?
I had 63. What was different for me is I played football, I ran track, basketball, I did everything. So I wasn't able to be like a lot of fighters, just all I did was box. I played every sport.
Cool. Danny, what state was it you were actually born in and grew up in, and what boxers did you look up to the most growing up?
I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, grew up here, and then moved to Tennessee. My favorite fighter was Bob Foster, light heavyweight. He's a guy that a lot of people don't talk much about, but he was a knockout artist. So I really like Bob Foster a whole lot.
And Danny, could I actually ask and interject there? Who right now in boxing, like just a side question, who is your favorite pound for pound boxer like right now at the moment?
Right now, I would really say Terrence Crawford.
Terrence Crawford, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you didn't have a pro career, so what was it you were doing during your 20s and 30s as, what was your line of work? Because were you always working towards becoming a boxing coach, or were you doing something else in your 20s and 30s?
Yes, I was in my early 20s. I was a finance manager at Hayes Mitsubishi. So I was financing vehicles for people, and I was a buyer. So I went to different auctions and stuff like that, and also ordered new vehicles from manufacturers. And I just happened to always stay working out. And then Coach Broadway asked me if I would help him train a kid named Terrence Churchwell back in like 94, 95. And I said, I don't know. I really love my job. I like what I'm doing. He said, really take a look at the kid. So I came to the gym and looked at the kid. He was a dynamic puncher. One of the top amateurs around. He fought Floyd Mayweather. He beat Diego Corrales. He beat a lot of guys that I even worked with.
I wanted to ask you, who are some coaches that you maybe worked with, or coaches that, even now, present or past in boxing, you admired while you were coaching, or even right now? Like, who are some coaches that you looked up to?
Well, Floyd Mayweather Sr., I came up under him. I was a protege. I was an assistant to him.
Okay.
We had Steve Forbes, IBF junior lightweight champion at the time. Coach Kenny Adams is another guy that I was also assistant to for a couple of years before I started training people on my own. And so I was in Vegas working with Coach Adams. We had Diego Corrales, we had Ruslan Chagayev, the former heavyweight champion. We had the 2000 gold medalist, Muhammad Abdullahi. We had Kuna Tokumbaya, and I also had Ishe Smith at the time also.
That's what I was actually going to ask you, Danny. Who was the first boxer that you coached? See, that was the story of that. And also, like, what other notable boxers did you coach throughout your career? Because we do know that you coached BJ Flores, who was obviously the former coach of Jake too. So what other examples is there, Danny, that you coached throughout your career?
I also trained Victor Ortiz, former WBC champion. I trained Fernando Vargas. I worked with Jermaine Taylor. I also worked with Robert Amenaza Garcia out of McAllen, Texas. I worked with James De La Rosa. Wow. Started thinking, because there's been quite a few. It was 11 former world champions total.
Wow. So you obviously go from coaching a lot of traditional boxers. Now, a lot of the viewers of the podcast are going to know you from your previous role of being a head coach for Jake Paul. Now, was it through BJ that you kind of got connected? Because I always wanted to know that, because I think Jacob Chavez was the head coach at one point. How did you kind of get like interjected into that circle of getting to work with Jake? Was it through BJ?
Yes, BJ asked me to come to Puerto Rico on a vacation.
Okay.
I said, okay. So I came out there. I was just going to say 4 days. So I came out there, packed just enough things for that. And when I got there, he told me that they were scheduled to fight Tommy Fury. I said, okay. So he said, will you help me break down film and tell me what you think? Would you come by the gym and tell me what you think I should be doing? I said, okay. So I came by. Jay Leon was there, and Jake's, all the people that was with him were also there. So there's a lot of things that BJ didn't know, and he was asking me. And then Jay Leon was like, hey, man, I really like for you to join the team. And I was like, I didn't bring enough clothes or anything. I didn't come out of this was just a 4-day vacation. I had house shoes and slides and sandals.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it. You can buy all new things. So they talked with Jake, and Jake was like, yeah, man, I really want to get better. So that's how that all happened. It came about.
What month of the year was that, Danny? Like, that was the latter part of 2021?
Right before Tyron Woodley, because it was supposed to be Tommy Fury.
And on the Tyron Woodley rematch, Danny, there was a moment within that fight where Tyron Woodley landed an elbow on Jake's forehead, opened up a massive cut. There was blood running down Jake's face into his eyes. I just want to know what was going through your head in that moment, and can you also describe to us what sort of character it takes for Jake to have came through that the way that he did, the adversity that he faced in that moment?
I said, based on my experience, I said, this is going to be the tell of whether or not he really wants to be here or not. I'm going to treat this like he doesn't have a cut. We're going to continue with business as usual, and I'm going to give him the instructions that he needs. So I was on the side, and BJ was in front. Then he got on the side so Bob can get in and work on the cut. So I was just telling him nothing's happening. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's get the feint. Let's get the jab going. We're going to get the right hand involved. But you got to feint and give him different looks and change your levels up, and you catch him.
Now, let's talk about that KO really quickly, because that may have been, for me, like from what I've seen, that was a brutal knockout. I don't think I've seen a knockout that brutal since then. And I want to ask you as a coach, I mean, have you ever seen that from a fighter that you've coached previously, a one-punch highlight reel KO on the big stage like that?
Not like that. Not like that. No.
So it felt very like spectacular for you as well as a coach, just seeing that, like, wow.
Yes, it was spectacular. Jake showed composure. He has a really great mindset for the sport. He really does.
I want to just touch on that KO of Woodley again, because once that happened, Jake Paul, the first coach he ran to was yourself in the corner. It was a real wholesome moment where you embraced each other. It was a real kind of father and son sort of, kind of proud moment. Can you just tell us like how proud and you were of Jake for accomplishing that?
I was very proud of him, and the thing after the fight, he told me he apologized for not doing some of the things that we had worked on earlier, and I told him, listen, you got a knockout. There's nothing to apologize about. You are new to this. You went to a decision with this guy. It was a very tough fight the first time. It could have went either way, but you got to the victory. This time, there was no doubt. There was no doubt.
Just as the fight poster said, no doubt.
I want to fast forward just a little bit. So obviously that fight happens in December, I believe. And then you guys really went through some adversity with, you had 2 fights that fell through, and walk me through as a coach, right? You're working with a novice, someone who's still pretty green in the sport, getting better, but what's that like as a coach, having to change up the game plan and try to get a guy like Jake, who's very, as I said, green in the sport, trying to get him to, adjust from a game plan for Tommy Fury to Asim Jr.? Like, was that a really difficult process for you?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't difficult. The most difficult thing working with Jake is having 3 coaches. I've never been in a situation like that before, where you got BJ as a coach, you had Jay Leon coaching, you had myself, and I've always just been the voice, and it was just always me and maybe my personal assistant and a cut man. So delegating duties to BJ and also Jay Leon kind of took away from a lot of the things that I normally do. So that was more harder for me than just working with Jake.
We obviously got to Anderson Silva, October 2022. Anderson Silva, who just come off the back of beating, former WBC champion Chavez Jr. So this was a big fight for Jake. This was a big fight for Jake to take. And I've got to say, Danny, the improvement Jake made between Woodley rematch and the Tyron and the Anderson Silva fight, it was a massive, massive improvement in Jake. He looked like a different boxer entirely. I just wanted to know, like, how hard in the gym had Jake been working for that fight, and what was your assessment of Jake's overall performance that night, which for me was the best boxing performance of Jake Paul's career so far?
It is. It is. I knew it was going to be a tough fight, and to be honest with you, I wasn't too thrilled about taking that fight because it was offered to us like 4 months prior, and I said no because I haven't had enough time with him, and then he's never been in there with the southpaw for me to even agree to anything like that. So I brought in Chad Dawson. We brought in a couple other southpaws, and the very first day of sparring, he didn't look so good. So I was like, oh wow, I don't know if this was a good idea to take the fight with Anderson. So I talked with BJ, and I was like, hey, listen, we've really got to step on the gas. I need you guys to kind of step back a little bit so that I can really work with him with the southpaw style. And Jake really caught on very, very well fighting the southpaw. So he worked really, really hard. We had a great camp.
That's awesome. I mean, you could see it in the ring, and I would agree. I love watching that fight back. It's one of those ones that it's aesthetically pleasing on the eye. You know what I mean? Like, amazing performance. And by the way, like, credit to yourself and the rest of the team for that, because, especially for a guy like Jake, and I've always said this, to go from, even back in the Woodley fights, right, to go from a really tough first fight and then 3 months later to kind of, have to step on the gas a bit more, change the game plan, go back into a fight in a rematch that was a really hard time first time around, find that shot, and then in the Anderson Silva fight, as you were saying there, the first southpaw is a guy who defeated a former WBC champion. I mean, that is insane, right? So I give you and the team a lot of credit for that. Moving on to Tommy Fury, which was eventually scheduled for a 3rd time in February. For me, I always felt, and I'm interested to see what you have to say as a coach. For me, I didn't know how Jake would do against a guy who had an active jab like Tommy did, because as Tyron, Woodley, and Silva are very credible opponents, right? And they gave him tough fights. They didn't have that. And Tommy's got good footwork, right? So what did you see in Tommy as a coach that made you confident with, like, right, I think we can take this fight and be successful?
Well, Tommy didn't do well with pressure, and he keeps his head on the middle. And Jake has a really good jab and a good straight right hand. And Tommy's never been 8 rounds before. And so they were already scheduled a couple of times before anyway. So it was in their mind. They were taking this fight regardless.
Yeah. And there were a lot of unanswered questions around Tommy. Yeah.
Yes. And the thing about Jake in that fight is he had COVID, man. We maybe sparred out four times for the fight. We left our training camp in Puerto Rico, went to Dubai. We only ran maybe 3 times. I mean, it was one of those situations where we shouldn't have really been fighting because of the sickness. And coming down the stretch 2 weeks before the fight, he had hurt his shoulder. So we only sparred maybe 2 times.
Wow.
It was the worst camp we've ever had. It was worse. And Jake didn't want to pull out of this fight because he didn't know if Tommy would come back and even take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
and he really wanted to beat him. So this was, to me, I'm thinking this was more personal. I don't know what they've done prior to me joining the team. So I know they've had words before. So this was something I think was personal and that he wanted to happen because he would always talk about how bad he wanted to beat him.
Yeah.
If we could have fought Tommy in replace of Silva, it wouldn't have been as hard. It wouldn't have been that tough because we had a great camp.
So you would say a lot of that kind of came down to the camp and how that whole situation with COVID, and there were some other things that were going on that Jake's spoken about outside of the ring that, that can affect your training. You think it's a lot of the camp and just kind of the wrong place, wrong time to take a fight like that?
It was. I mean, he just broke up with his girlfriend, so he was highly emotional.
Mm-hmm.
That was damaging, and I didn't know how bad it was because Jake's a pretty private guy and very tough guy, strong mentality and will, and he don't share a lot of things that really bothers him,
Mm-hmm.
But he told me that one time that he didn't look so hot in sparring. He was like, he was feeling bad over Julia and these things like that, and I was like, well, I understand. I'm glad you told me now, but I wish you would have told me before
Yeah.
sparring
Yeah.
so that we make adjustments.
Yep. And would you mind me asking, was there a point where you guys maybe thought about, should we advise him to pull this fight, given everything that's going on?
Yes. When we had to have an EKG because he was having some issues breathing, and this was like 3 weeks before the fight. He went to see a doctor, and he and his dad, and we all talked. It's like, hey man, he don't need to be fighting. We don't know what's going on with his heart. With the COVID, we don't know what will happen in the ring if he'll get tired. We just don't know. And his dad was in agreement. And when he had the EKG and all the other situations, they said it was okay and he was clear. We made weight by sitting in the steam room 2 times a day. We didn't even run. He
Wow.
didn't eat anything.
Danny, I'm glad that you spoke about that, because a lot of people, in the comment sections, they'll say, oh, that's all crap. Everything that Jake's saying about a bad camp, it's an excuse. It's an excuse, but I think it's refreshing maybe for some people to hear that, because I think people sometimes don't factor in that this is the fight game and you're not going to go in there 100%, but there are real things that can factor into fight night. I mean, you get one shot at it, and it sounds like it was a really rough camp, and I didn't even know about that EKG that you were talking about there. Like, so it's even more serious than I thought it was. That's interesting. So I appreciate you speaking on that.
No problem.
Back in January, Daniel, this year, when the Jake Tommy Fury fight was getting scheduled for a third time, could you just give me like an idea of what sort of confidence level you had, a number percentage, what sort of estimate you would say?
I felt like if Jake could feel good and if he could just throw the right punches to control Tommy, we had a 70% chance of winning.
Okay.
And Jake told me he felt so flat. And I know that's due to sitting in the steam room. And the morning of the weigh-in, he spent about 10 or 15 minutes in the steam room to take off the last like pound and a half. And he happened to drift to like 183 and some change. So he even got a little bit lower than expected because he was really trying to make weight because we didn't run. We didn't do a lot of work that we needed to do.
And Danny, another question. Looking back at the fights that Jake had with Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva, for me, those two guys brought Jake a real tough test. Those were not easy fights for Jake. So my question is, like, given the standard of competition most upcoming boxers face at the start of their careers, average sort of local journeymen, to me, those sort of guys aren't on the same level that a Tyron Woodley were and Anderson Silva were. I was just curious as to why you felt that at that moment after the Silva fight, that was the time for Jake to step up again and face a boxer who's been doing it his entire life when Jake hadn't been doing it his entire life himself. Did you feel he was ready for that step?
Fighting Tommy your first time out, a guy that had that much amateur experience along with pro experience, is normally not a good idea when you're building a guy that's trying to excel in boxing and even try to make it towards the world championship. I would have rather fought someone less talented that couldn't move very much and very well so that he can get more of an understanding in the ring of boxing with boxers. We sparred all boxers, and he done very well in sparring. every single time. So, but they're fixated on Tommy. They wasn't fixated on that. So it's out of my control of at that point. So, but I really believe, and Jake believe, and everybody believed he can beat Tommy. But under the circumstances of what we went through in camp and the fight that he put up with Tommy, based on how he was feeling, he did okay.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I want to ask you, do you think that with a good camp, right, no COVID, none of that going on, do you think Jake could beat Tommy in a rematch? Especially given seeing like Tommy's performance against KSI. I don't know if you saw that, but do you think that that's a fight that's winnable for Jake going forward?
I think this is the thing. I'm not in camp with him, so I don't know if he's progressing. I don't know if he's building on the things that we were doing, because I'm a very defensive-minded guy, because you can't go into a fight just being all offense and just standing there.
Yep.
You'll have a short career. So I don't know if he got anybody around him that understands defense the way I do. So for me to say that, I don't know.
About because I think Jake's training with some KRONK guys now. What do you make of that style of boxing, the KRONK style?
They're not very defensive minded. They're in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be very tough for Jake to fight like that without having an amateur background and being able to do that consistent over and over and over and over and over. They get hit with uppercuts, right hands, but who knows? I mean, Jake has a lot of natural instincts. So if something's not working for Jake, he'll move away, he'll move back, and then he'll try to keep distance so he can see what you're doing, and he'll try to use his jab, and he'll try to throw his right hand, and he's trying to get his left hook developed. And like I say, I'm not in camp to know if he's getting any better. But, I didn't see the Diaz fight, but, people would call me and were like, hey, he didn't look as good. I'm like, I don't know. I still didn't go back and see it. He's like, he was moving around. He had a guy in front of him that can't punch. It was just awful, and I just like, look, people being hard on him. He had to get his confidence back. He needed the rounds. He showed that he can go 10 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I still haven't seen it, so I don't know what it looks like to really, talk about it to you.
I asked in one of our chats earlier today, I said, do any of you have any questions for Danny? And someone said that you, I guess, had been very vocal in the build-up to, it was one of the Jake fights, about getting carved up. And how important is it for fighters out there when they're making weight or after they've already made weight in that 24-hour span between the weigh and the fight? What should a fighter do to have the best result in the ring? Is it just an increase of carbs? Is it hydrating yourself? What is the best way? Because I think there's some people in our chat that are upcoming fighters as well, and they just want to know what advice you would give if you had to make a weight that you usually maybe don't get to, that span little window between weigh-in and fight night.
So when you're giving that kind of advice, you have to know how much weight did they lose. Did you lose 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20, 30, 40? Because that's going to determine whether you was carb deficient, whether you were more dehydrated. Do you need more minerals? Do you need Celtic salt? Do you need magnesium? Because the cells rejuvenate when water and magnesium go into the cells. Mm-hmm. That's how you hydrate really, really fast. It's not like drinking a bunch of water, drinking a bunch of Gatorade, a bunch of sugar. It's about having Celtic salt and water and alkaline in your water with lemons or lime. So if you're losing a minimum amount of weight, you don't have to carb up. If you're between 5 and 15 pounds and you're training properly and you're eating properly, then you need to hydrate and make sure that your cells are full of magnesium. And that's going to help you. And if you're one of the guys like Fernando, we've lost 80 pounds to fight Shane Mosley. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
But Fernando has been a hard worker. He just put on a lot of weight. So he was dehydrated massively. I mean, it was really bad for him.
And the last question I would ask you, Danny, is to any other young fighters, what is some advice you would give them about how to move up in the ranks and what they need to do to be successful in the sport of boxing?
The very first thing you do want to have is a trainer that'll be honest with you, that'll tell you when you're not doing well and when you're doing well. Having cheerleaders is the worst thing that you can ever do, is having coaches that'll just motivate you and be loud and just make you feel good. and then you get into an actual fight and you get hurt.
Yeah.
So make sure you get a quality coach that teaches, not just train, not someone that emulates this fast-paced mitt work and doing all this little fast stuff. You need someone that can let you know there's 11 punches in boxing, and you got to know the counter punches to that. So you got to know the defense to every shot that you throw. You got to know what the counter to that shot is and how to defend it, whether it's weaving, rolling, sliding out, dropping, catching, pivoting, whatever it may be. When you understand leverage, distance, and range, the game is a lot easier than when you just in there freestyle fighting.
It's a lot of knowledge, Danny. I'm not gonna lie, man. I feel like I just read a whole book or something, man. I feel much more educated on just boxing alone. This has been a really good podcast. Is there anything that you're doing right now that you would like to promote? Any social media platforms, anything like that?
Oh, I'm kind of more, anybody that knows me knows I'm pretty quiet. I'm not looking for anything. I'm very comfortable in life. I own real estate. I got my own gym. I'm just in a great financial situation. I'm very grateful for every fighter that trusted me with their life. And I've been able to raise all my children because of these guys. And I'm just so grateful for every fighter that trusted in me. And that's why I've always been honest. I've always stayed in great shape for myself so that I can work really, really hard. When you hit the bag, I'm there. When we hit the mitts, whatever you do, I'm running with you, sprinting with you. We're lifting weights together. I mean, I am hands-on 100% because I hate to freaking lose. I'd rather not be in boxing if I had to. I would not.
Well, Danny, those are some really wise words. We appreciate the time you gave us today. Seriously, man, it means a lot.
Man, no problem, man. Thank you guys for having me. And anytime you guys want to talk about anything, I'm always available.
All right, guys, we've officially wrapped up the Danny interview. By the way, big shout out to Danny Smith for hopping on the interview and giving us a lot of insight, a lot of stuff we didn't even know. So shout out to Danny. You guys can go follow him on Instagram if you want, at Danny Smith. And yeah, we want to do some more podcasts and more interview style podcasts. So let us know who you want to see in the comments down below. Once again, big shout out to Danny, and we will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Full Disclosure Podcast, and we'll see you in the next one.